Last week, I reported on the Substack article by Canadian economics professor Michelle Chossudovsky about the concert hall attack near Moscow, an attack which the terrorist organization ISIS, or Islamic State, took credit for. In that news item, I gave credit to Chossudovsky as much of what I reported came directly from his article. An article which revealed that ISIS was originally an al-Qaeda-affiliated entity created by U.S. intelligence, with the support of Britain's MI6, Israel's Mossad, Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, and Saudi Arabia's General Intelligence Presidency. And that the U.S. government knew details of the attack weeks before it happened. And that it's an open secret that there are soldiers from large Western countries, such as the U.S. and France, fighting in the Ukraine against Russia, despite official claims to the contrary. These aforementioned assertions have since been given extra weight by Russian President Putin's direct accusations that the CIA and MI6 funded the concert hall attack with cryptocurrency, and the fact that at least one of the arrested gunmen stated that he was being paid to do it. French President Emmanuel Macron has been the most vocal critic of the Russian attack on Ukraine, but that is no surprise when you learn that thousands of Russians are in Africa in opposition to the thousands of French military troops in Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, and Guinea, all of which are former French colonies and still under significant French influence. You also need to know that in Syria, right now, the Syrian government forces, the SAA, or Syrian Arab Army, are largely funded and supplied by Russia. The alert among you will have noted that my credit for this week's story is myself, because at this point, I'm going to build on the foundation that Michelle laid and explain how all of this is directly connected to naive, woke students and others of the uneducated and largely white masses demonstrating around the world in support of terrorist organizations operating in countries they've never visited and probably couldn't point out on a map. In his article, Chossudovsky also explained the decades-long history of the U.S. interfering in European and Asian affairs. I'll build on that by pointing out that one of the biggest and baddest of the original globalists was John D. Rockefeller, whose meddling goes back to the 1800s. John Rockefeller was a known eugenicist who advanced population control and one of the original large investors, along with Dale Carnegie, in Big Pharma. Together, Rockefeller and Carnegie heavily influenced U.S. politics, and John's son, David Rockefeller, was instrumental in the formation of the Trilateral Commission in 1973, which sought closer ties between North America, Western Europe, and Japan, the first world government organization. The Trilateral Commission was formed just 2 years after the European Management Forum, which would become the World Economic Forum. The EMF, which became the WEF, was founded by Klaus Schwab, who still holds a primary role in the organization today. Schwab was assisted in the formation of the EMF by his mentor, former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who worked in direct cooperation at many times with the Rockefellers. Knowing all of this, when Chossudovsky talks about the U.S. meddling in other countries' affairs, what he's really referring to is globalist influence in world politics. Even globalists have to come from somewhere. Schwab was born in Nazi Germany in 1938. Rockefeller was American. What they have in common is a complete disregard for national identity in favor of globalist control. Their control. And so they control or heavily influence national governments and work to bring about a one-world government through destabilization, war, terrorism, economic sanctions, massive immigration to erode national identities, and much more overt operations, such as the World Health Organization's coming Health Treaty amendments. And since they are the enemy of all nation-states, they want a military force of their own Despite corruption of UN forces, they can't use them, at least not outright. Not yet, anyway. But they can use terrorist militants. They can fund them, supply them, and point them at anyone who's obstructing their plans. Easy to do, as the terrorists are almost without exception Islamic extremists of the convert or die type, who are happy to kill any infidel who denies their radical version of Islam with globalist-supplied guns and bombs. For example, since the outset of the March 2011 U.S.-NATO attack on Syria for regime change, globalist-controlled Israel has been an active partner with the then globalist-controlled U.S. and has supplied weapons to the terrorists attempting to change Syria from a secular government into a Muslim Brotherhood-led government, which would be U.S.-friendly, which is to say, U.S.-financed and manipulated. Under President Obama and his then Vice President Joe Biden, the U.S. elevated the Muslim Brotherhood to ally status. And it should be noted that while the U.S. to this day does not list the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates do, and they're all Muslim countries. Would they label the Brotherhood as terrorists if they were committed to peaceful political or religious reform? And let's not forget Russia. Russia, under Putin, lists the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. The same Muslim Brotherhood which is known to be directly connected to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, the organization that claimed responsibility for the concert hall bombing. A bombing by globalist-controlled and funded terrorists against civilians in a country with a leader who is definitely not on board with their one-world government plans. In the latest example of government and terrorist cooperation under globalist coordination, this past Monday, Israeli forces attacked Damascus, the Syrian capital, with an airstrike which hit the Iranian consulate, while Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, based in Idlib, attacked the Syrian Arab Army, or SAA, on the outskirts of Idlib in northwest Syria. The HTS terrorists used suicide bombers as well as armed terrorists to carry out the attack, which claimed the lives of SAA soldiers. During the course of the battle, as the Free Syrian Army retreated, the Jabhat al-Nusra terrorist group moving outward from Idlib started making advances on the Syrian battlefield. At the head was Mohammed al-Jalani, a Syrian raised in Saudi Arabia. He had fought the U.S. in Iraq as an al-Qaeda member, then became the leader of ISIS, and finally came to Syria to form his own brand called Jabhat al-Nusra in 2012. The U.S. continued to support Jalani and his fighters in Idlib, but once Jabhat al-Nusra was listed as an international terrorist group, the U.S. insisted Jalani change its name in 2017 to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham to rebrand itself. The name translates to the rather innocent-sounding Levant Liberation Committee. Despite having only formed a committee, the following year, in 2018, a number of countries, including Canada and the U.S., labeled Hayat Tahrir al-Sham as a terrorist organization. And it is Jalani and his terrorist organization, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, with its roots in the Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, and al-Qaeda, who are holding 3 million civilians as human shields in Idlib, just as Hamas attempted to do in the Gaza Strip. And remember that we know UN troops were involved in the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel that killed 1,200 people, most of them innocent civilians. There have been dozens of extremist attacks in Europe in recent years, and now they're attacking Russia. World War III has been going on under our noses for many years now. We just didn't notice because bombs weren't landing on our schools and in our backyards. And on college campuses around the world, the globalists pulling the strings of the controlled governments and terrorist murderers get an added bonus. Dissension, unrest, violence, and division through demonstrators who are too woefully uneducated and gullible understand that those same terrorist organizations they are demonstrating for will gladly send a suicide bomber to kill them and their families when their globalist puppet masters decide to point them in that direction.